Hello, and welcome to another episode of Activating Greatness, the show where we dig into what it really takes to lead with purpose, inspire performance, and create lasting impact. As always, I'm your host, Alec McChesney, and every episode we sit down with leaders, thinkers, and change makers who are unlocking potential in themselves, their teams, and their organizations. Here, we talk about the real stuff: leadership that drives culture, strategy that creates momentum, and the mindset that turns good intentions into game-changing results. Because greatness, it isn't a title, it's a choice. It's something you activate every single day. So thank you. Thank you for listening, for showing up, and for being part of a community of leaders who refuse to settle for good enough. Now, let's dive in and meet today's incredible guest. Today's guest is Tony Greco, a senior leader with extensive experience in building and leading teams across national and global environments. Tony has spent his career navigating complex operations, driving strategic execution, and leading distributed teams, including his time with USGA and Wyndham Hotels, where scale, consistency, and connection were critical to success. Tony is known for his calm, disciplined leadership style and his ability to simplify complexity while maintaining high standards. His experience spans operational excellence, analytics, strategic planning, and team development, all within environments where leaders rarely share the same physical space. So, Tony, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. Before we dive in, would love to hear from you. Give a little introduction for those who maybe aren't familiar with you yet.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And Alex, thank you for having me here. I think you covered my background fairly well. I have worked at some large global kind of international organizations as well as the USGA, which, while a big organization in the world of golf, is a small business with 300 or so employees. And most of my career has been spent managing remote teams before remote teams were a thing. So my first remote job was sitting in my basement under a staircase in a makeshift office, making phone calls because there's no such thing as video. So I've kind of learned the hard way how to manage teams around the world that way, and it's been a fun experience for the past 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I love it. And that's, it's exactly what we're going to talk about today is how can we build a strong and aligned team when that proximity is no longer a given. And so much of what we talk about on this podcast is connection, communication, cadence. How often do we meet? How often are we maybe getting in person, or do we not need to get in person? And I love having you on to specifically be able to talk about, hey, I was doing this prior to COVID, and now the world is here, and the phone call or the conference call doesn't really exist anymore. We do have this opportunity to go face to face. So with that being said, I just want to dive in. We talked about your experience involving teams spread across regions, often globally. And what I'm curious on, and what I know a lot of the leaders who listen to this will be interested in hearing, is when you no longer have that advantage, or your team just doesn't have the advantage of getting together in person, being in the same room, having the water cooler conversations, what is most important? What kind of rises to the top from a team structure in these environments that you have really found yourself comfortable within?
Yeah, really good question, Alec. So you're exactly right. The thing that you lose by not being in the same space is that kind of leadership or team building by osmosis. The walking down the water cooler, or having lunch together, or our building has a golf simulator. So those things that you can just kind of get together casually, but have those kind of one-off conversations doesn't exist, obviously. So as a leader, I need to be very intentional to create those opportunities for me to interact with the team, for the team to interact with itself, and then for all of us to interact with the wider organization, because there needs to be that connection. So a lot of my time is spent intentionally thinking about, who am I going to talk to? What am I going to talk about? Am I being consistent in my message? Or is my team talking to each other? Do they all know what's going on? Are we connected to the organization? So I have to set clear expectations as a team and as a set of individuals, because they're also sitting in their home offices doing their thing. And it's it's that old adage, like silence creates gaps. So if they're not hearing from me or hearing from the organization, they're going to fill that silence with assumptions. And if those
Mm.
assumptions are not what I need them to be, then we're going to go down a rabbit hole that I have to get out of. So a lot of time is spent intentionally talking about what's going on. I need to repeat some of the priorities of the organization to make sure the message is being heard, and just creating those authentic but intentional connections.
Yeah, I love it. And there's so much within there that I want to highlight or double click on. The first is that intentionality, right? You know, there used to be things that happened on accident or you bumped into somebody. And so you were able to check in. Hey, how did your son's baseball game go last night? How was the dance recital? There were moments that were created by that proximity. And now we have to be intentional to have those human behaviors. I also love the aspect of the expectations of the team. And that is a question I want to ask my bad podcast question right out of the gate here, Tony. How do you get the team members to buy in, right? Because so much of this requires, yes, a leader. Hey, I want this. I want this for our team. But you also need those team members to say, yeah, I believe in this. I understand why I'm doing this. So what are some of those tips or tricks or things that you've seen? Hey, I can get that buy-in and now we're all on the same page and going forward here.
Yeah, so I have a structure and a process in place for communication that is uh, predictable and repeatable. I have one-on-ones with each one of my team every week. If one of us is traveling, we need to move it around. We both have the ability to move around, but it happens unless someone's on vacation or something like that. So it's a dedicated time where we know we're going to have that time together. We
Mm,
also meet as a group once a month, and the expectation is everybody is engaged. And in that meeting, anybody can put an agenda topic on the agenda, but there is an agenda and there's a reason. Is it a feedback? Are we making a decision? If it's something that can be done in an email, it's not wasting our kind of valuable face-to-face time. So
mm,
there's the one-on-ones every week. There's a group touch point once a month. And then 2 to 3 times a year, we try to get together in person around some work activity.
mm-hmm.
But one of those times that we're together is we do our goals as a group. So everybody has their individual goals, but at the end of the day, they're all up on a spreadsheet and everybody sees each other's goals, whether it's related to them or not, and we talk about it as a team. And do those goals align and reinforce with the strategic direction of the organization and the department? And everybody has a chance to weigh in on everybody else's goals.
Mm,
And then once we decide what the goals are for the year, they get assigned to an individual. And then 2 to 3 times a year during those team meetings, we put them up on the wall again and say, okay, how are we all doing? Is somebody having a challenge? Can someone help with someone else? So there's no surprises, there's no secrets, there's no little side projects going on. We all know what's going on together. That creates alignment to the strategy, but it also creates a connection where someone can help someone else if they're struggling with the goal. It's not all them coming through me.
I wanna follow up on that last part because you're really talking now about the team being able to support each other and not needing to go through you to reach out to a colleague or someone in the same position in a different region. And I think that's one of the bigger fears of remote teams is they're not going to be connected. They're not going to lean on each other. And they're always going to need Alec or they're always going to need Tony in order to do that. And it sounds like through some of these, structured environments that you're able to create a process and then let them play within it. And, at Velocity, we talk all the time about its systems and its people. But if you have the right systems, the people can kind of play in those spaces. And so I see you nodding your head. I don't know if there's even a question here, if you just want to, if there's any extra commentary you want to make on this, on how you've seen your people in the organization you've been at kind of flourish and start to learn to work together, despite maybe being adjacent to each other or certainly in different regions.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. When I was at Wyndham, I was tasked with bringing together a specific revenue manager group from all the different regions around the world. So the European team, the Australian Pacific team, the Latin America team, the United States, the North America.
Yeah.
they all worked together in their own way with their own continent for their own business unit. And I was being tasked with pulling a global team together. They knew of each other, but they never worked with each other before.
Mm.
So we went through, like, I know Velocity uses DISC, and there's lots of profiles out there like that that teach you about yourself, but also how other people are. So I had the team go through one of those exercises, and we all had our profiles of who we were. We shared them with everybody. Then I brought them together in Orlando, because why not, right? So we went down to one of the parks and we did like a scavenger hunt and just a team building thing, so they all got to know each other. But I picked the teams based on the disc profiles of who would be similar from across the region. So there was no, they were intentionally mixed from across the continents.
Yeah.
That gave them a chance to know each other. As revenue managers, they're highly competitive, so they wanted to win the scavenger hunt. But then we got together afterwards and how'd it go? We used that framework then to say, okay, let's create a department-wide strategy. And again, I picked people from different continents with similar, like the people who are good at conceptualizing. They got together and created the original framework. And the people that were good at, putting structure and organization on it, they got together and took the next stage. I made them work together in
Mm.
different groups based on their skills. So then not only did the strategy become a holistic, we all built this together, but they got to know each other. So then when they had a business problem, instead of them calling me, they were calling their counterpart in Australia and say, look, you do something similar here. I'm struggling with this. How do I get it done? And then I didn't have to be in the middle of everything, but they also created those relationships.
Yeah. Wow. I think there's so many applicable aspects of that story, Tony. And I think at the highest level, it's just the investment in the team, right? If you make that type of investment from not only a financial standpoint of bringing everybody to Orlando, but also just from a time and commitment, it goes back to that intentionality of what we are trying to set up in order to be successful. And I think it takes you out of a bottleneck position, right? I think one of the things that we hear all the time is that managers and leaders struggle to delegate, and there's always firefighting, and it's coming up, it's coming up, and it's coming up. And a great way to mitigate that is, hey, you've got peers that are doing the same thing across the globe. Let's build that network and allow you to be able to do that together. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I can't be in the middle of everything because, first of all, they generally know way more than I do about their jobs. My job is
Yeah.
to remove roadblocks, not tell them how to solve problems. So even if I'm talking to one of them in a one-on-one, I'll say, you know what, why don't you call this person? I know they're having a similar challenge. Go, you guys figure it out, come back to me with a solution, and then we'll figure out what makes the most sense to them.
Oh, I love it. I want to follow up on that, and it's a lens into our next line of questioning, because you mentioned something earlier about it's predictable and it's repeatable, and that's the method for communication. And I think, again, the curtain around remote work is, how are you going to communicate, and are we going to be seeing each other? And there's been a lot of commentary on this podcast specifically about one-on-ones, and if you have the right structure for one-on-ones, you become more successful. If you have a wrong structure for one-on-ones and it's just a task rabbit, or it's too up in the air, then you're going to be feeling lost. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, you have this predictable and repeatable process. There's dedicated time, but how do you balance that with kind of that feeling of, maybe I'm overwhelmed, right? Like there's a lot going on, and I've got I've got maybe a handful of meetings. I'm curious just how you balance that structure with teams, especially in a remote context, feeling overwhelmed by all of the different things that are happening.
Yeah. So for me as the leader, the most important thing I do every week is talk to my team in those one-on-ones. I never deprioritize that, no matter where I am in the world, what else is going on. I'll move it around to different times to accommodate it, because the teams are different time zones.
Yeah.
But I prioritize that regardless of the other meetings that I have.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the team goes, they also prioritize it, but it took a while for them to get comfortable that this was a serious thing to me, because
Yeah.
as a leader, you can put a priority out there, but then if you don't ever ask about it and follow up on it, it's not really a priority because it goes off. When they would say, "Okay, I'm busy this week. I'm not going to be able to draw a one-on-one," I'm like, "No, find a time that works. I will make
Yeah.
time. You find a time." And then they got to be comfortable and trust that I actually did care about what they had to say. I have learned each one of them individually, and some like to do the kind of casual chat about the kids, how was your weekend? And some dive right into, here's what I have going on, here's what I want to talk to. That's fine. However they want to use the time, it's their time to have with me. If I need something during the course of the week, I'm not going to wait for that. I'll talk to them individually and vice versa. But so they know that whatever is going on, there's time with me. And sometimes it's 15 minutes, and up to that 15, some of it's 10 minutes of chit chat. Sometimes it's more than the half an hour. We need to schedule more time, and that's okay. But whatever's going on in the moment, there's time for it.
Your dedication to that time is what's leading to their dedication to that time,
Yeah.
and knowing that it's pivotal to the success. But I have to say thank you for the part that you said. There's somebody that's going to come in and they want to talk about the family and kids, and there's somebody else that's want to, like, let's get these things done. And you are going to manage them where they're at, and you're going to allow them to dictate what they need from that meeting, as long as we're still getting what we want. And we've been talking a lot in 2026 about every person's different, and you have to manage the whole individual. And just because they maybe have the same job title does not mean they communicate in the same way, doesn't mean that they want to be communicated to in the same way either. And so I love to hear that, and I appreciate you saying it. On the same token with that, you mentioned earlier this strategy. You get together, we might set the strategy for the year, and we've got some high level priorities. The biggest argument that I have heard and believed in a little bit for remote work is it's harder to fulfill strategy because you leave and everybody ends up doing their own thing to survive, and priorities change. You get that shiny object that comes by, and we end up taking that and we end up firefighting. And so, you mentioned some of the meeting structures that you have, but how else are you looking at, okay, we've set this strategic vision for the year. I want to know that we aren't going to just throw that away 3 months later. We know you're working in a different market. You have different responsibilities, but as an organization, this is where we're headed. How do you make sure that that stays top of mind? How do you make sure that that stays something that the team really believes in and understands is the true north of the organization?
It comes from me consistently making sure it's on an agenda. So again, we meet every month as a team. It's not on the agenda every month, but it's probably on the agenda every third month.
Yeah.
How's it going? Are all of our goals still aligned with the strategy? Stuff happens all the time, right? So we at least once in the middle of the year step back and say, do all these goals still make sense? They made sense back in January and February, but the world is changing. The organization is changing. New opportunities, new risks. Do we need to step back and rethink what the goals were? And if we have to change it, that's okay, right?
Yeah.
No one is pressuring enough in February to know how December 31st is going to last. Let's make sure we're focused on the right things. I try not to change priorities often. So part of my job managing up is to filter out the fires and make sure that if the new shiny object gets pushed down to me, I make sure that it's the right shiny object for the team to be focused on versus maybe I'll do something on the side with my boss to keep them focused. But even in those conversations that happens, I share with them what's happening. Here's what I've just been told by the CEO. Here's the direction they want to head in. This doesn't quite align with what we started, but we should pivot, or it doesn't align. I'll take care of this. You guys continue to stay forward, and I'll keep you in the loop of what's going on. But it's me making sure I bring it up. And what I found over the years is if I don't, one of the two of them will bring it up. Hey, look, we haven't talked about this in a while. Can we get this on the agenda? Yes. So they know at the end of the day that this is their responsibility as much as mine, but I need to make sure it's top of mind on a regular basis.
Yeah, which again goes back to this the call out of that accountability and trust that you have to have as a team working remotely. And I think there's this interesting balance of, hey, you work remote, if you get your job done, That's all that really matters. But I would, are you on from 8 to 5, or are you working at night because the kid is home, and all these different things are happening. So, in your mind, in your opinion, how do you kind of balance that accountability? I need this from you, but also trust, right? Like we talk about this human leadership perspective. Where do you draw that line between, hey, I'm going to hold you accountable, but I also trust that you're able to get this done the way that you
Yeah.
want to get it done, and that might look different than how I want to get it done.
Yeah, look, I learned that the hard way back in the pre-COVID days when there was no video again. All I had was phone calls and
Mm-hmm.
emails. So I didn't, there was no
Yeah.
little red light that someone was on or not on that I could check. So I totally had to trust that they were working.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I didn't care. I had young kids back then, and was, like I said, working in the basement of the stairwell. So if I needed to go help with the kids or get them off the bus or something like that, I needed 15 minutes. I let them do what they wanted. I just need to make sure that they were getting their work done at the end of the day. When I was younger and didn't quite know how to lead as well, I was probably a little bit more of a micromanager. Okay, what did you do this week? Did you get it done? And then I realized I just need to give them a project or a goal or an initiative and say, let me know when it's done. And if you're having trouble, make sure you speak to me, but we'll check in once or twice during the course of the X number of weeks it takes.
Yeah.
I don't care what hours they work, especially back then I had people literally over the world. So the time zones for my working day was 12 hours or more. Let them do what they want. They get the job done. What I would find if someone was not being successful in that role, my job was to work with that individual as opposed to change the process for the team, not to punish
Yeah.
everybody. And I would
Mm.
have to every now and then, okay, what's your goal for this week? How much of this are you going to get accomplished? And then next week, did you get done last week what you thought you were going to get done? What do you go for this week? Until they got into more of a rhythm, because working remotely is hard for some people if they're not self-disciplined enough to put a process and a structure in place. So
Mm.
some of what I've done with some individuals is you need to have a calendar. You need to set time in your calendar for your own, not a meeting, but for you to do X amount of work. Turn your emails off from 9:30 to 11:30, and don't get distracted by the messages popping in. So some of it, you have to really teach the individual how to help them be successful. And as
Mm.
long as that works, it works. And if it doesn't, then you move in another direction.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of leaders who are going to be listening to that answer right there, and taking some action items out of it, because COVID changed everything. Right now, there's so many companies that just say, "Hey, flat out, you're remote." I had never worked a day remote in my entire life. Coming up in journalism and then at a marketing agency, I was at an office for too long. You might argue, and so it was a complete change for me. And then when it was hybrid, you started to figure out, okay, maybe I'm good in the office and I'm not as good at home, and my hours are different. And now fully remote, it did take me some time to map out, okay, here's the time that I do these types of activities versus the other activities. And I think, to your point, every person, that's going to look a lot different. And I am way better at 5 a.m. than I am at 5 p.m. And, if somebody's worried about that, then I'm going to struggle, because I want to work at the time that I'm feeling the smartest and
Yep.
feeling the most engaged too.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. We literally were together 2 weeks ago as our first in-person meeting earlier in the year. And part of what we did one morning, we rented an Airbnb and we sat down, we had breakfast together, we cooked for each other, and then we sat at the kitchen table and we just went around the table. When are you at your best at work, and when do you struggle the most at work? And some people have young kids, some people have no kids or older kids. Everybody had different time periods that made sense, and it was interesting to listen. Like I intuitively knew that, but I never actually asked the question out loud. But for them to hear each other and the conversations, I go, okay, well, you're good in the morning, but you got a bus pickup at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So let's change our conversation to this time because it'll fit better. So as as smart as I think I am sometimes, just asking the questions out loud and letting them talk to each other, it really was a great conversation.
I got the goosebumps on that one, Tony, because Brooke Page Thompson, Velocity's president, and I recorded earlier this year. And one of the questions we said every single manager should be asking is, when do you do your best work? And if
Yes.
you don't know that about your team member, then it's going to be really hard for you to understand why they want to work at 11 p.m. at night, right?
Mhm.
Like if that's what gets them into that, white zone, that pocket, let's let them be in that pocket. And so I love to hear it. And even that next step of your own colleagues and your team members hearing it and saying, hey, let's reschedule our one-on-one because you are frustrated after you did drop off and things got a little hectic and now you're just trying to survive. So I love that use of questioning and that use of time in person too. Okay, I've got one more question for you, Tony, and then we're going to go into the rapid fire leadership question that we ask every leader here on the Activating Greatness podcast. You mentioned something earlier about things change, right? We've talked about COVID in terms of the remote, but it also changed how people think about strategic plans, right? And a decade ago, Velocity made its business on, hey, we can do 3, 5, 10-year strategic plans. And now you think 4 months is what we're trying to do. And you said something that I really value, which is we have a strategic plan. And if something comes in that we're entertained by and we think, hey, we might want to do this, you have to go and you have to look. Does that align with our strategy or does it not? It's not the end of the world either way. But if it doesn't, then we have to change the strategy. We can't just say yes to it and keep everything the same. I'm curious, just how do you balance those conversations when, whether it's from the top down or bottom up or industry, COVID is a great example in the golf world. Like when those things happen, how are you communicating to the team and saying, hey, this is the strategy. This doesn't fit that. Are we willing to change our goal because of this? Or like, just kind of walk me through. You don't need to give an example per se, but just kind of walk me through your thought process on how do you communicate through that? How are you transparent? And what are you thinking as that's happening?
Yeah. So if we assume we're not talking about something as catastrophic as COVID,
Yes, fair. Good
change the
point.
world, that it's a business opportunity or risk, then it really just is getting in a room together or on teams together and saying, here's what's going on. Here's the information I was just informed of. Let's go through and look at how does this fit within the overall strategy. You have a 3-5-year plan. How does it fit into the 2026 portion of that? Should it prioritize above something else? Does it fit in and should it prioritize? If yes, does something need to come off or deprioritize? And then who's going to take the lead on it? And let's flesh it out and make sure it happens properly. So it's a complete, transparent conversation. My team knows I'm sometimes brutally honest with them. They also know we have a circle of trust, right? So I'm going to share stuff with them that they're not allowed to repeat, and if they do, we're going to have an issue. But that they then know exactly what's going on in my mind and why and how I think about things, and they can be the same way back. So if there's a shiny object from leadership that I'm not sure I believe in, I'll tell them that, and then they'll say, "Yeah, you know what, you're wrong, Greco. We want to do that anyway because here's why it makes sense." Or, "Okay, we're on board. Let's figure out how to stop doing that." But it's just open, transparent communication. And at the end of the day, I need to make the decision. I take all the consensus and conversation in, but they know that I'll make the decision, and but they'll also know why I made that decision. Whether they agree with it or not is okay. But I'm going to have the conversation, and then we'll move forward.
Yeah, the conversation piece of this, we had an episode with a senior advisor here at Velocity, Ryan Payne, all about conversations, and conversations create culture. And just what you walked through creates an environment of, okay, I trust that Tony's hearing me, whether he goes in that direction or not. My piece was heard. I feel valued, and now I understand why we went in the other direction. And the last piece I want to call out on that answer is, if we're going to prioritize something new, we need to deprioritize something else. And I think there's a lot of leaders and a lot of people who are going through burnout in 2026 where we've got this priority and then we're just adding 2, 3, 4, 5 more new priorities. And if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. And that leads to the burnout, that leads to the frustrations, and you start to have those cracks in the team and cracks in the culture too.
Right. It creates that lack of trust where they're not going to believe what I say because I'm just going to say, yep, do more, and that's not helpful. So.
Yeah. All right, Tony, this has been exactly what I thought it would be. Fantastic. People who are listening are taking notes, and they're thinking, I want to work for a manager and a leader like Tony. But I've got 4 rapid fire questions for you that we're going to run through. Every person that we interview has to answer these 4. The first question is, what is one leadership habit that you rely on every day, no matter what?
Preparation. So all my meetings have a 24-hour notice so that I can plan ahead to make sure I'm prepared for the meeting, whether I'm leading it or participating in it. So being prepared, being consistent, and then following through with whatever I'm responsible for.
I love it. All right. Question number 2. What is the most underrated skill that a leader needs today in order to be successful?
I would say listening to understand as opposed to listening to answer. A lot of times I'm not great at it sometimes. Sometimes I'm answering in my mind before the person finishes speaking. But you need to really understand not the words, but the intent behind the words to understand what they're really trying to ask you and then answer appropriately.
Everybody needs that one. No matter how good you are, that is a skill that you could only get better at on a day-to-day basis. So that's a fantastic answer. Question number 3 here. What is one thing that you believe great leaders should stop doing?
You can't please everybody all the time. So don't avoid being clear with the goal of keeping the peace. You want to be able to have healthy conflict conversations, challenging, important conversations without worrying about hurting people's feelings. So if you have that trust built, you can have that and then move forward.
Yeah, I've got holding up my microphone right here is Kim Scott's Radical Candor, all about clear is kind, and clarity is the nicest thing that you can offer someone. And leaders who are afraid of doing that to keep the peace, that again, there's a crack somewhere, whether it's today, 6 months from now, 18 months from now, that happens. Okay, last question on the rapid fire leadership is, what's the best leadership advice that you've ever received?
So one of my first Honeywell bosses said, treat people the way you want to be treated, which I did for a long time. I've modified it, we talked about it earlier a little bit, to treat people how they want to be treated, not how I want to be treated, because I'm a very direct, straightforward person, and not everybody's that way. So why would I treat somebody who wants to be different?
That is the one of the pitches for the disc platform and the personality styles, whether it's disc and birds or it's any other, the Gallup strengths or whatever it might be, is let's meet people where they are at rather than meeting them where I am at. And I also think that's one of those underrated skills that leaders need to have, the ability to flex between meeting with Alec and meeting with Joe or Jennifer. Those are different meetings. And if the manager can do that, you're going to be a lot more successful.
Well, and just to build on that slightly, I know I'm not supposed to follow up. However, it's a lot of work for a leader. Like if I have 8 direct reports, I have to understand 8 personalities and 8 directions. So it's a lot more work for me to do that. But at the end of the day, the relationships and the work that gets done is so much more productive that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great follow-up. Okay, the last question we have here, we asked this of everybody on the show, Tony, is just who is a leader, whether you've worked with, you've never worked with, you think, whatever it might be, who's a leader that we should potentially interview next here on Activating Greatness, somebody who is doing great work, doing meaningful work that others would be able to learn from?
So I would say she's probably on your radar already. Lisa Clicchio. She was the CHRO at Wyndham when I was there. I worked for her for the last part of my career there. She's a CHRO at WCG right now. She's values driven. She's focused on outcomes. She's not looking for attention to herself. It's much more about the team, and she's just such a good person. And you can look her up on LinkedIn. She does lots of really strong posts about being human and being nice and treating people the right way just in the world and humanity. So someone I really admire a lot. So I think she'd be great at this.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. I'll be sending Lisa this video, and we'll get her on the podcast going forward. Tony, this has been fantastic. For those that are listening, if you have follow up questions, don't hesitate to connect with Tony on LinkedIn and shoot him a note and say you listened to the podcast. Or you can always reach out to me, and maybe we'll have to bring Tony on for another episode later in the year. Looking forward to 2027. As always, for everybody that is listening, thank you for being a part of the Activating Greatness community. You can get the podcast anywhere that you listen to podcast. We originally had a goal of 25 for the year of 2026. And I think right now I've got 54 people lined up over the next 4 months. And so we are going to be rolling out episodes left and right. Tony is just one of the fantastic guests that we have lined up. So if you're listening to this and you think you should be a guest on the podcast, reach out. Or I had a couple messages in my LinkedIn today of people saying, hey, you should be interviewing my boss or my leader. So don't hesitate to reach out, because this community is just going to continue to grow. And if you are listening, make sure to leave a comment, leave a 5-star review, subscribe, all of the things that you're supposed to do. So that way I can continue to prove that this is working to the Velocity Advisory Group team. Tony, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your expertise, and your time with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I got to say, you're really good at this, because you were clearly listening to my answers and following up on them, which is very impressive to do in real life.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm just taking your thing to heart about listening to understand and not listening to answer. So, Tony, I appreciate it. And as always, everybody, thank you for listening and have a great day.